So, welcome to our podcast. This is the third in a series of what we're calling opportunities hidden in plain sight. And the reason that we even named it this is because when we're working with companies, we listen to, my sales aren't going up. I can't get my customers to understand what all these different things. And then we're like, oh, this is something that happens often. And when you just start to use a little bit of discipline, it starts to help uncover what the issues really are and to start finding ways to address it. So, this one, Tom, do you want to go ahead and say a bit more about what we're going to delve into here?
Well, in the previous two episodes, we talked about influence mapping and opportunities that are hidden because you're just not talking or thinking about the needs of non-technical buyers. And then we started talking about last episode. We talked about talking the language of people outside of the technical buyer. And what you understand once you start building benefits ladders and doing things that are around that kind of exercise, you realize that not everybody prioritizes the same things in the same way. And so we've talked for many, many years about the idea of lukewarm tea, which seems very obvious when we explain what we mean by the lukewarm tea syndrome. The lukewarm tea syndrome is that some companies, some buyers might like their tea ice cold. Some buyers might like their tea piping hot. And what most companies do with that information is they make lukewarm tea right in the middle. They average the result, and nobody is happy. But when companies start to understand, simple ways to see how different companies make decisions differently, the act of segmenting, needs-based segmentation, they start to see opportunities in retrospect that look very, very obvious, but weren't at the time because they were in their own way, treating everybody the same way, making lukewarm tea. So, Mary, I know you have a really good example, and I do too. Why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I think this is important because a lot of times when companies are like, "Uh-oh, we're stuck," they go to R&D and go, "Okay, you need to develop new technology. We need to come up with some new products." And the beauty of this is that you don't have to create anything new. It's just the approach to the customers. And so this is one of my favorite examples. Airlines always are a good example of segmentation. And with Southwest Airlines, their model forever was you just line up and then you get to sit wherever you want. And if you're first, you get a better seat than somebody else. And so everyone pretty much pays the same price. You get on the plane and that's it. And then they were not doing well. And some of the active investors started pushing and saying, you guys, you need to come up with a different model. And they finally kind of bowed to that paradigm shift and said, okay, why don't we, think about this different? And actually, they had research that said customers are willing to pay different prices for different parts of the plane, and they just kept ignoring it. And then finally, they had to. So they opened up where you would pay, like most other airlines, where you would pay for a seat that you pre-selected and you would pay more for better seats and less for others. And so that's a really good example. And why it works well with airlines is that they use discipline. Like if you're in first class, and you have a few seats that may be available, you don't let somebody from the back of the plane come and sit up there just because there's an empty seat. You have to pay for that, whether through its loyalty or other things that you have to do to be able to earn that. And so it's customers are more happy anyway, and you make a lot more money. So seeing Southwest do that was really cool. And then Delta has been, of course, doing the cabin selection forever. And they just announced that now, not only in a cabin, so if you're in premium select or first class, now you get to pick the benefits that you want in those. So two people can be in first class, and one person is going to actually pay less for their seat, their lie flat seat, because they give up going to the lounge or other flexible things about their price. So and it allows each flyer to, to optimize what they want and what they're willing to pay for or what they get reimbursed for. And it allows the airline to monetize all of the preferences. So that's kind of it on steroids, but it's
Mhm.
still just such a good example where forever airlines have just said, oh, the fuel costs are too tough for us. And Delta's figuring out a way to do very well. So those are two examples.
And that's good.
Tom, how
It's
about
really, yeah, it's really about tailoring the product, the communication, or the customer experience, in this case, the customer experience, based on whether somebody likes hot tea or cold tea, in my earlier example, rather than averaging like Southwest was doing in the old days, and Delta's going completely to the other end of that to almost like a one-to-one, level of marketing, create your own experience based on, what you're willing to pay. My example is about a company, a pharmaceutical company. This is a technical product. Pharmaceuticals are technical products, made in labs. And they had this particular company had come up with a potential cure for a deadly disease. And they were getting a lot of attention for this drug. They were talking about it, in the press, and the trials were I guess going well, and their stock price was going up. The drug itself was known to have a really interesting chemistry. It was known to have, potentially difficult side effects, but it was a potential cure for a then deadly disease. And like most technical companies, when they come out with something, really cool, really novel, they went out and they talked to everybody about this drug, every doctor in the same way. And it was not doing anywhere near, for example, what Wall Street thought it should be doing. And so there was a lot of pressure in the company, on this company to improve its performance around this offering, this drug. So they did some segmentation, and I won't go deeply into the segmentation, but they realized that different docs, had different preferences and needs, and they had created 6 segments, and found 2 of those segments that were really great candidates for the drug, but they were 2 very, very different segments. There was one segment that was really into the science. Okay, they really liked this novel chemistry. So you could talk in technical terms to them, and they were willing to listen, and actually use the drug because they were also aggressive patient treaters. So they were very technical, science-minded docs, aggressive patient treaters, aggressive in their patient protocols. There was also another segment that was really, really, really all about the patient. I mean, all doctors will tell you I'm all about the patient, but some are truly, truly all about the patient. They call them patient-centric aggressive treaters. And those people, those docs, they were willing to do anything to save their patients. Those were the 2 out of 6 segments. The other ones were either non-aggressive, so they were a little afraid of the drug, or they were business minded and they were worried because this was new, unproven, that maybe there were some lawsuits that would happen. Well, this was the secret. Instead of talking about lukewarm tea, talking about everybody in the same way about the drug. They tailored their message for the science-minded aggressive patient treaters and the patient-centric aggressive patient treaters. And they actually talked to those 2 segments very different. So they tailored the communication, and they kind of left the rest of the world alone for a little while. And what happened was all of a sudden they're talking the right language to the 2 segments that were highly attractive targets. And both of those segments found success with treating their patients with the drug. And they started talking to the other segments and their peers about it. And the actual drug became a real success. But this was an example of how, and it seems obvious, right? In hindsight, that's what this series is all about. You look back and go, yeah, why didn't they see that from the beginning? Well, they were excited. It was very technical, and exciting product, and they wanted to talk to everybody about the technical aspects of the drug, and it just wasn't the right approach, and they missed the opportunity that was hiding in plain sight. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of my favorite examples with a client of ours, because we focus on the B2B world, was a dental equipment company. And it's tough. I mean, all industries are tough, and that one was tough too. And so we did exactly what we're talking about. We helped them segment, and we brought salespeople in so that the salespeople could also look at it and say, yeah, I know docs that fit here or operations that fit there. So, it very quickly became real because the salespeople were part of the process. And they had four segments and they identified them. The salespeople went out. They had, depending on which segment they were going to go to, they would talk about different things. And it was just so clear. And their sales rose because they were able to focus on segments that were more responsive to certain things, like, if you had to get a, what is it? Root canal, they had special root canal stuff. So they knew there was like some of some of the doctors love doing root canals, and so they knew that that was something they would talk more with them, and then other ones more about just optimizing their business. And as a result, this dental company did very, very well and was able to exceed their profit projections. So
Yeah.
it seems like it's an interesting concept, but it's very real and it's very practical, especially when you get other people involved in helping to refine it and then make it come alive very quickly.
Well, and Mary, we wouldn't be true to the series of opportunities hiding in plain sight if we were talking about techniques and tools that were complicated. A lot of people do think, well, wow, that's really complex. How do you segment your market? And in fact, many companies, as we observe, segment in what we think is a non-insightful way, based on how big or small an operation is, something that is not necessarily tied to the needs and how the customer would define themselves. This is how we operate. This is, our profit driving DNA kind of, approach to the market. But we did speak last podcast about the technique, I believe, of the Vietnam card sort, where if you want to have better dialogue with your customers, you kind of hypothesize some different needs, 4 or 5 different needs that you see that different customers have, and in the card sort interview, you put those 5 different needs on index cards in front of the customers and ask them what you missed, right? And you do that with 50 customers over 3 weeks across your top 10% of your sales force, and pretty quickly you find out what are those benefits that come up again and again that customers seek, that are not necessarily, they're not technical, they're business outcomes that your clients are seeking, and that's the language you have to talk about. So I kind of repeated something that we did last time, but I wanted to set up how you simply do segmentation, which is at the end of that conversation, when the 4 or 5 benefits sought that the customer you're interviewing has said, yeah, those are things that I care about. You say, put them in order of importance to you. And again, if you do that for a couple of weeks across 10% of your sales force and 50 customers, you start to see patterns, those patterns of clients who similarly rank those benefits. They're all in the same segment, but they're in a different segment from clients who rank the benefits in a different order. So it's like a card game, a simple card game, a fun game that's about the client that they love to participate in because it's all about them. And it's a simple way to create segmentation hypotheses without having to spend $100,000 or more.
Yeah. Yeah. So we hope that you try some of this, and as always, let us know when you do it because it's fun to hear your stories. So thank you.